When I was a kid, growing up and making my way through grade school, I used to love it so much when it would snow, especially when it would snow so much that we wouldn't have to go to school. Of course, whenever this would happen, we would have to go back to school a day or two later, which of course was sad. However, when all my classmates and I would return back to school, there would always be one big difference that had us all excited. And when I say it was a big difference, I'm speaking quite literally, because we would come back and find a huge, gargantuan mountain of snow on the far end of the parking lot where we had recess. And each and every year when the snow pile would appear, we were told explicitly to be safe if we were playing on it and to not do anything dangerous. The only error in this directive was that the playground supervisor never defined the word dangerous to us, so it was left to our interpretation. All the boys in turn took this to mean that we had permission to play a little game called King of the Hill. Now, for those of you who don't know what this game is, I'll quickly explain that the goal is to be the king of the hill. And the king was always a person who's standing at the very top of the snow hill. If you're not the king, meaning that there's anyone above you at all, your goal is to try to make it to the top and get above them. And if you're on top, your objective is to push and shove everyone else down so they can't dethrone you. Now, I wish I could say that I frequently held that top spot on the hill and that I was the best king my school has ever seen. I'd be lying if I said that, because I cannot ever, in all my years of grade school, remember a single time that I made it all the way to the top. See, I was really bad at this game. I had a huge disadvantage because I was really tiny. One of the smallest kids in my class. I don't think I even came close to reaching the heights of glory upon the top of that mountain of snow. Each day I'd try my best, and each day I got pushed around and beat down. And I have to admit it became less and less fun each time. But I still put myself right into the middle of it each day because it's simply what all the guys did. At least it was what we did until a playground supervisor would see us and disapprovingly yell at us and make us stop because they didn't want us to get hurt. Now, my guess is right now, as I tell this story, most of you are probably thinking one of two things. Either, Father, I know exactly what you're talking about because I played that game. Or, Father, that sounds really dangerous and really dumb, and you shouldn't have been doing that. Either way, my guess is that at times, perhaps, your own life has maybe looked like a high-stakes version of King of the Hill. I say this because the world that we live in tends to be a dog-eat-dog world. We can tend to get wrapped up in a brutal game of chasing results and admiration, popularity, and promotions and all that we do. We want to be the best that we can possibly be, and we probably enjoy climbing higher and higher in whatever categories are important to us. And yet, no matter how high or far we seem to advance in the world, my guess would be that none of us here have ever made it all the way to the top. And that even if we have, my guess is the fulfillment is short-lived before the world shoves us back down and reminds us that we still have a long way to go. After a while of being caught up in this vicious cycle, we might get to a point where we get tired of playing the game at all, where it's not fun anymore. Just like as a kid, I grew tired of getting shoved down, pushed around, and never reaching the top. But just like I kept playing the same old game again and again and again, I think a lot of us probably feel like we have to do the same thing in life. After all, no matter how tough it is, we have to pay the bills and support the family. No matter how rough school might be for students, we have to study, work hard so we can get a degree, so that we can work to pay the bills and support the family. And after a while, I think we just settle into the grind, and maybe we begin to believe that the middle of the hill is good enough. Maybe we come to a point where we're tired of fighting and pushing back against whatever circumstances act as roadblocks in our way. And for that reason, we allow ourselves to be pushed further and further back down the hill. My guess is that sometimes we all feel this way, because it's the experience that the world around us seems to offer. no matter how great we seem to be doing, there will always be someone better than us, someone higher up on the hill, and our fallen human nature can always be prone to envy when someone else is the king and we're not. Thankfully, this experience that the world offers us is not the only experience out there to be had. I say this because the way in which Jesus preached the Sermon on the Mount, that includes the Beatitudes that we just heard. See, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he had sat down, his disciples came to him. The next line, of course, obviously tells us that when the disciples came to him, that Jesus responded by crying out in a loud voice, "I'm the king of the hill, not you," and that Jesus then proceeded to push and shove them all down the hill because they weren't as perfect or holy or accomplished as him. That is what it says, right? Nope, of course not. What actually happened is so different from what the world around us would expect. See, the whole scenario begins with great crowds from Galilee and the Decapolis, from Jerusalem and Judea, even beyond the Jordan. It's a long way, coming to see him. And from this we can safely conclude that these people coming from distant lands, they wanted to encounter Jesus because they looked up to him. And as they stood below, in the midst of their weakness and imperfections, looking up at him in his righteousness and perfection, he didn't tell them to go away. He didn't look upon them with disgust. He certainly didn't push them down. Rather, we're told that when he saw them, that he climbed up the hill and they came to him. In other words, he invited them to be with him and to follow him up the mountain. And when they arrived there and sat down and he began to speak, he of course would have invited them to sit close. It was at this point, on the top of the mountain, with the crowds gathered around him at the pinnacle, that he proclaimed the Beatitudes. It was at this point that Jesus spoke, and in doing so, shattered the worldview that's so easy to get caught up in. With the Beatitudes, he shattered the notion that it's only in being perfect, strong, and popular, and being the best of the best in all areas that we have value, and that we'll ever be able to stand on the top of the mountain. Jesus proclaims that we are blessed and provided for in the midst of mourning, when we're persecuted, when we strive to make peace rather than siding with the most powerful to try to get ahead. You see, what Jesus was proclaiming through the Beatitudes is that no matter where you seem to be on the mountain of life, if you're on the top of the world, or if your circumstances keep shoving you down with no end in sight and seemingly no way to get back up, no matter where you fall, so long as you follow the invitation of God, you can walk right up to the very top of the mountain of faith, of righteousness, and fidelity, and you will be blessed, and you shall be called children of God, and you will inherit the kingdom. If we pause for a moment to reflect on these promises, we will see that these benefits for climbing the mountain of God are infinitely better than being the king of the hill of the world. Now, this, of course, is all well and good, and I'm sure it sounds nice, but I wouldn't be surprised if many of you right now are thinking to yourselves, "That sounds nice, Father, but that's just not how the world works." I'll admit that I often feel that way as well, too. I experience the pain of hardship and struggles in my own life. I feel like I'm getting shoved down left and right every single time that I try to take one little step up the road of progress. That I can read some scripture or spiritual reading that speaks of turning to God and finding our peace and our joy in him. And while it sounds nice on paper, while I'm praying in the moment, once I stand up and go about my day, it just doesn't seem to break through. It doesn't seem to fix things. I desperately want it to. And sometimes in my experience, it seems as if turning to God for help helps for a brief time, but a lot of times it doesn't seem to last. Perhaps that rings true for you just like it does for me. Well, thankfully, there's one more little detail that I think changes everything. And what I'm about to say, it revolves around one tiny little word from Matthew's version of this story. It comes from the fact that when Jesus went up the mountain and sat down, we're told that he taught the people. He didn't simply speak to the people. We're told explicitly that he taught them. There's a huge difference in that. The reason why is because he simply spoken the Beatitudes or proclaimed them. It would have sounded nice, but it really wouldn't have given the people the chance to allow this message of hope to sink in. Jesus taught the Beatitudes. I want you to think for a moment back to your days in school. My guess is we'd all agree that the best teachers that we had, those memorable ones that we remember, that put a smile on our face, they didn't simply tell us the information that we needed to know, dictating it to us one time and then moving on. Right? The best teachers, they take time to unpackage the information, explain it, helping it make sense. They make sure not to move on until we understand. They certainly would give examples, make analogies, try to relate it to your experience. Oftentimes, good teachers will take an entire class period to assure that their students understand one important point in a crucial lesson. This is simply what a teacher does when they teach, because teaching involves so much more than just relaying facts or giving information. With that in mind, let me say again that Jesus taught the Beatitudes, didn't simply say them. How was it that he did this? Well, how about the fact that he went up the mountain and allowed them to be with him, that he drew them close, that he rejoiced to share his position on the top with them, that through the whole thing he was loving them in the midst of their weakness rather than pushing them down. His presence in the midst of their brokenness and suffering was precisely the proof that backed up his message. Now, my dear brothers and sisters, the Beatitudes matter in our own lives. And their message that we are blessed, protected, and provided for, even if we find ourselves at the very bottom of the pile of life, is so important. And it's so crucial that we believe this at our very core. And again, we might say that it sounds nice in theory, but that we've never really experienced it ourselves. Perhaps you've prayed and asked God to help you, but it doesn't seem to click or provide what you were looking for. Well, right now I'm going to reveal to you the one thing that can and will change everything. And it's this. You have to let Jesus teach you. You have to be willing to spend time learning his ways, to spend time in his presence so that he can help you to understand the lessons of life that you might struggle with, that he wants for you to understand. It isn't enough to read the main points of the chalkboard at school. Right? We'll never get where we need to be if we just glance at the information but refuse to take time to let the teacher's explanation sink in. Today, right here and right now, Jesus is ready to teach you. But if we ever want to truly understand the peace that Christ offers, the peace that the world cannot ever give, we have to be willing to go to class. If we skip class, we're not going to ace the test. So my encouragement to all of you, the same advice that I have to remind myself of daily, is it's never enough just to hear the words of Christ or to ponder the law of God for a few moments and then go about our day. We have to sit with Jesus, to be with Jesus, to open up our minds, to consider what it is that he has for us, and to allow him to teach us the depths of who he is and what he's about. We have to really spend time with him in order to allow him to help us to truly understand. He knows exactly where you are right now. He understands all of your weaknesses. He knows all your shortfalls. He knows all your fears. And he invites you to come with him up the one mountain that truly matters. Will you choose to set aside dedicated time each day to encounter Jesus in prayer? By sitting with him, to speak with him, and to listen to him in your heart. Will you? The lesson is ready. He's about to teach. The question is, will you be in attendance or will you skip class? This is a question that we're faced with each and every day. How are you going to answer?